During this unit, we're going to focus on integrating source materials into your work. This is really important because as you move on, especially as you're thinking about academic writing, it's important to think about the ways we can use source materials to support our work. We bring in source materials, we bring in other text for a number of different reasons. But one of the biggest things to remember is that we're always using these texts, we're always integrating these texts to support our own arguments, our own points of view. And we're not using them as the focus of our writing, but we're using them to support our own writing. We want to use them to show that we have read widely, that we're credible sources, we know what's going on in that field or subject, to show different points of view, to show something that's really important in what we've read. But all of these are supporting our own work and they are not the focus of the work. And I'll do this through a number of different ways. We're going to focus on 3 of these ways: the quoting, the paraphrasing, and the summarizing. And each of them are different. Each of them are used for different reasons. We'll go sort of through that in the slideshow, but all of them are used when we're thinking about how we bring sources into our text. So before you even integrate a source, there are some things you have to do. There's sort of a plan of action and component for bringing source materials in. And usually this is set up by how you frame the source. Then you sort of use a signal phrase to alert people that you are going to talk about the source. You integrate the source material and then you analyze it. We should never end a paragraph, end an idea, just quoting someone and then leaving, or paraphrasing and then being done. We need to tell the reader what we know about that text. Why are we using it? We need to analyze it, really tell them why it's important to our argument. So I'm not going to go over the analysis part because that's what you do with your source material, but I'm going to talk about how I would frame source material. I use signal phrases and the different ways I would then incorporate and integrate that source material. We'll start with framing. Frame is this way you introduce the source. You tell us why it's important. You let us know that you're going to transition into really talking about a source. This should happen throughout your paper. It should happen whenever you bring in sort of new sources. Often what we see is a student will write the name of the person who wrote this, the name of the author, the incomplete title, what the author does for a living. Just know you don't need to write all of that. You don't need that every time. Think about why you're using the source. Is the source important because of who the author is? Is it important because of the text, right? So think about that. So I'm going to use this Harry Potter example throughout. Here's how I frame it. I start with a sentence that sort of introduces, right, one of the themes in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is courage, which is seen throughout the book, and it's the young wizards battle against Voldemort, right? So I know that they don't know it's Voldemort until the end, but we're going to go with it, okay? Introduce the source, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I am not giving you J.K. Rowling, who she is, all that, because I don't think it's relevant or needed right now, right? I'm telling you the purpose that I'm using. So I'm using my quote that I'm going to introduce you to because I want to talk about courage, right? So I've sort of set this up for you. You know, something's coming up. It has to do with courage. We can see it throughout the book. That sort of tells you that maybe she's going to talk about an example from the book, right? Then we use a signal phrase. I gave you examples of a number of them, like signal words, signal phrases. I would suggest thinking about these as like turn signals. So we're marking where the source is coming in, how we're going to use that source. And so here again, here's that first introduction, that framing, and then this moves into the signal phrasing, and then I gave you also a quote. So I brought in the source material so you could see how it fits together. One example of how the characters are rewarded for their courage is when Dumbledore states. So here you see one example is sort of setting up and signaling that I'm going to give you a specific example. So I'm going to probably use a source, right? Probably use something from the text. And then when I say states here, that lets you know, okay, now she's going to tell us something else. Now her quote's coming in, right? I could use address, I could use claims, I could say Dumbledore declares, right? I could use a number of these here. And then I have a comma and quotation marks because it's a direct quote. And then I let you know where to find it, right? So I've set it up in a way that I introduce, frame it, I signal it, and then I have the quote. And then, as you can see, Rowling becomes here in 306. So I know if I go to page 306 in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, written by Rowling, I'm going to find this quote. Then I would describe here or analyze what I think the quote means. We use a quote if we have to use exact words from the source. You have to have quotation marks. Anything with two or three or more words that you're directly taking from another source, you need to use quotation marks. You need to cite it. Quotes must be cited. So here, this is just the quote, same from like the example here. So you can see this is how we're going to quote it, right? Quotation marks at the beginning, at the end, who wrote it, what page, period. This is for a book. If you're quoting something else, if you're referencing something else, citing something else, there are different ways to do that, and I'll give you some links for that. Now, in the works cited page, this is an MLA. You can, and both of these are MLA, so you could choose MLA, you could choose to do APA. I probably wouldn't do Chicago because MLA and APA are probably the two that you'll use the most, but if you want to use Chicago, you could do that as well. But if I have a book, I use the last name of the author, comma, first name. Then I put the text. Then I put the publisher. Then I put the year it was published. So my works cited, which is at the end, is going to have all this information. All right. Now, if I'm going to paraphrase, I can paraphrase that quote. And that means I just want to put in my own words. I don't need quotation marks. So if you're paraphrasing, don't use quotation marks, but I still have to cite my source and where it comes from. So it's the same thing. This sets it up. This is that framing. Here is my signal phrase. For example, when awarding house points, Dumbledore talked about how brave it is to stand up to both our enemies and our friends. This is me putting that quotation into my own words. Again, if you want to know where I got this idea, where it came from, here tells you where it goes. So paraphrasing, still need to cite sources. At the end, you're still going to have the same work cited. Just remember, work cited, still going to look the same. Even if you paraphrase, you need to have it in your work cited. A summary is very similar to paraphrasing, but it's broader. If I have a chapter or if I have a section or a couple of paragraphs or whatever it is, I might not paraphrase those. Instead, I'd summarize. I'm thinking about sort of a larger overview. I'm not using quotation marks, but I'm still citing where the source came from. So here's the example using a summary. We can sort of see how it's similar and different. I have that. I just have the same framing here. And then courage appears at various points throughout the novel. Harry, Ron, and Hermione show courage throughout the Sorcerer's Stone, and Neville stands up to his three friends, trying to stop them from going after the Sorcerer's Stone. For this, he is awarded points for the House Cup and praised by Dumbledore. Citing it, the same, but see how there's a bit more information here? I'm setting up about how courage appears throughout the novel, how Neville is courageous, and then what he's awarded. This still tells you where you could find this information. It could be that this is a longer number of pages because you're summarizing a greater part of the text. For these purposes, I just put the same citation. As you can see, the works cited is still going to look the same, but paraphrase, summarize, quote, you always need to cite. If it's an idea that comes from someone who isn't you, even if you put it into your own words, you need to tell us who it came from. And then you put this all together in your works cited. So you have that last page, you label it works cited, it's set in the middle of the center of the page. You don't put works cited into italics. You don't put it into quotation marks. It's just plain. That's the only thing that should be centered. Everything else, all the citations should be aligned on the left, double spaced, and then you use what they call a hanging citation. So you don't indent the first line, but you indent all the other lines. You can use PP when you're labeling pages if you have an article or journal or something like that where it's not a full book text of anyway. And you don't have, so if it's 225 to 250, you would do something like 225, 250. If it's just one page, you just use a P. And then if you're citing something that was originally in print form, but you found it on an online database, let's say I found a database that had something about Harry Potter in it, I would make sure that I'm referencing the database in italics. I don't need to provide anything else, but do that. This information came from Purdue OWL, which is a really great website and source. So this is just some of what they have on Works Cited I wanted to highlight. Here's where I found it. So again, I'm citing my source. You can use the link to Purdue OWL, which is listed on our website. It is a really great source to use. It can help you create your own citation pages. It can help you with citations of all different kinds that you have questions with. So make sure you're thinking about integrating your sources. What kinds are you using? Are you going to summarize? Are you going to paraphrase? Are you going to directly quote? I would do much more paraphrasing and summarizing than direct quotes. You don't want a paper full of direct quotes. It does not look good. But think about that and then make sure no matter what it is, if it's not your idea, if it doesn't come from you, you need to cite the source. Your final page, your works cited, this is not everything you've read. It's only what you've cited. If you read something else that does not get into your paper, then you don't put it in your works cited section. So if you have any questions, ask. Otherwise, enjoy.